On the first question, what's the story? Well, as Michela and Stefania have said, this is a story of tremendous loss. But what I want to emphasize is that it's not a single story. And I've spent the last 18 months studying the educational impact of COVID. And I've just placed a link on the chat to a recent book, which is a comparative study of the impact. And what you see in that book is that this pandemic, the educational impact of this pandemic is mediated by nationality, because the choices that governments made were very consequential, the educational and the public health choices that they made. Subnational, because there were important differences across states, and in many cases, in the absence of adequate national responses, states actually stepped up to the plate and did in some cases, pretty good things. Absolutely a story mediated by social class. One of the things that we learn is that when the school moved to the home, we discover how much of a leveler of opportunity the public school is, with all its imperfections. And when you learn at home, all the differences in the social advantages from different kids become even more visible than they were. But the story for the most vulnerable, which is what we should be concerned about, is a terrible story of lack of engagement. Everywhere that I have looked, dropout rates are increasing. The numbers are not striking in some cases. I've looked at these in various states in Mexico. It looks like, an additional 5%, 6% of the kids who have dropped out. But we don't really know what dropping out means, because the kids that are in the books in this context of learning at home, we don't really know how engaged they are. But there is definitely evidence of dropout in the few countries where we have measured learning. In the traditional subjects, no question that there is learning loss, that this generation is less skilled than comparable generations 2 years ago. We forget right now, 18 months into this pandemic, that the schools before the pandemic weren't all wonderful, that there were many kids who were not included, that they were not learning the right things, that they were not learning very much. So those are the things we have to address. That's why I think this narrative of recovering learning loss and going back to where we were is a very poor narrative. It's a narrative of low expectations, because what we need to do actually is to reinvent schools. And I have a sense that the pandemic, as Stefania was saying, has actually opened a window of opportunity where more people are now paying attention to what schools do, and where perhaps they're even more ready for these conversations. I think it's very important that we ask ourselves, because one of the things the pandemic did is upended the rules through which the systems are normally governed. And let's face it, these rules sometimes are part of the problem. The mechanisms of procurement, the ways in which people communicate, who can talk to who, the barriers to participation of civil society and the private sector. And in this pandemic, as the ship was sinking, these rules were suspended. And all of a sudden, people could try new things and new actors could come to the table. And people did remarkable things. Private publishers donated their assets during the pandemic for the common good. So I think it's very, very important that we take the time to take stock of those things, to analyze them, and to say, what is relevant going forward? Because I have no illusions. I don't want to paint a Pollyannish vision that almost makes us wish we had this pandemic. This is a time from hell that could bring us the breakdown of democracy. And I'm not exaggerating. You probably have read the report of the National Defense Council published a few months ago that talks about the most serious risks to American democracy. A third of that report is about the pandemic and what it has done to social fragmentation. And if you pay attention to social fragmentation and the vulnerability of democracy around the world, you realize we are in deep doo-doo. But in that context, I think it is very important that we don't despair and that we find hope in what we learned during the pandemic that allowed systems and teachers and partnerships to innovate in unprecedented velocity.